I booked a room in a lonely cliffside hostel to escape everything. No Wi-Fi, no noise, no people. But the man who owned it, he looked at me like he'd been waiting for someone like me all along. The road that led to the edge of the cliff had narrowed until it was little more than a gravel path, weaving through scrub and wind-sculpted trees. His rental car creaked with each turn, tires crunching over stone. The ocean, vast and restless, appeared between the gaps in the trees like a pulse, drawing closer with every mile. When he finally reached the wooden gate with the rusted metal sign, Cliff House, the sun had begun dipping low, staining the sky with streaks of amber and lavender. The house itself stood solitary on the bluff, an old coastal structure with wind-worn siding and a wraparound porch. No other buildings in sight, no hum of traffic, only the crash of waves below and the distant cry of seabirds. This was exactly what he needed. Noah stepped out of the car and stretched his back. The wind caught the edge of his jacket, tugging at him like a reminder of where he was. He took a moment to breathe it in, salt, pine, and the faint scent of wood smoke. He hadn't smelled something that clean in months. Sebastian appeared from around the side of the house. He didn't wave, didn't smile in any obvious way, just a quiet nod and steady gaze. Older than Noah by nearly 2 decades, he carried himself like someone used to solitude. His face bore the sun's signature, lines carved by years of weather and light, and his silver hair was cropped short beneath a faded cap. His hands, visible even in the low light, looked strong and calloused. He opened the front door without a word and led Noah inside. The house was warm, not from modern heating, but from a real fire flickering in a stone hearth. The walls smelled faintly of cedar. Everything inside was minimal. Aged wooden floors, shelves lined with coastal books, a long table with 2 chairs. There were no TVs, no clocks ticking, no unnecessary sound. Just the rhythm of the ocean filtering in through the cracked open window. Sebastian handed him a key, gestured to the stairs, and muttered something about breakfast being around 8. Then he disappeared down the back hallway, his steps quiet but firm. Noah didn't follow. He simply stood there, fingers wrapped around the old brass key, as if grounding himself in the moment. He hadn't planned to say much anyway. The guest room upstairs was small but clean, with white sheets and a desk positioned directly in front of a wide window. When he set his camera bag on the floor, it landed with a thud that felt too loud in the quiet space. He unpacked slowly, placing lenses and batteries in a neat row on the desk. His camera rested gently atop the pile, an old companion, but recently neglected. There had been a time when he couldn't wait to chase light, to catch the world off guard. But lately, everything had begun to look the same. Cities blurred together. Faces lost depth. He had started to wonder if the magic was gone, or if he was simply too tired to see it. Outside the window, the sky darkened. The ocean roared a little louder. Noah didn't bother with dinner. He walked out onto the porch instead, pulling his jacket tighter around him. The boards beneath his feet creaked with age, and he leaned against the railing, watching the horizon disappear. The moon hadn't risen yet, and the stars were only just beginning to emerge, hesitant and slow, like they, too, were unsure of the night ahead. Somewhere inside the house, Sebastian moved about. The sound of dishes, the soft scrape of a chair. Not invasive, just present. Noah stayed outside until the cold nudged him back indoors. He passed through the quiet living room, nodding to the fire as if it were an old friend, and climbed the stairs again. The house didn't groan or settle. It just existed, timeless and patient. In bed, he didn't sleep right away. The ocean filled his ears, relentless but comforting. He lay there, eyes open, letting the sounds of the coast wash over him. Somewhere beneath all the fatigue, he felt something stir. Not quite hope, but the suggestion of it. Morning arrived with a slow stretch of pale light over the ocean, diffused through a sky thick with low-hanging clouds. Noah woke early, not because he had to, but because the silence felt different here. Less like emptiness, more like intention. The kind of stillness that waited patiently rather than demanded attention. Downstairs, the scent of something warm and familiar pulled him into the kitchen. Sebastian was already there, standing near the stove, one hand resting on the edge of the counter while the other stirred something in a pan. He didn't acknowledge Noah at first. The room didn't require words. The clink of utensils, the soft hum of the kettle, the crackle of the fire in the next room. These were their conversation for now. Noah sat at the table. He watched the way Sebastian moved. Not rushed, not for show, just present. There was a quiet competence in it. This wasn't hospitality for business. It was simply how the man lived. Breakfast was simple: scrambled eggs, dark bread with a crust that crunched under pressure, and black coffee strong enough to push the fog from Noah's thoughts. They ate mostly in silence, and when Sebastian finally did speak, it was only to ask if Noah had plans for the day. Noah shook his head. Just walking around. Maybe photos if I feel it. Sebastian nodded once. That was enough. After breakfast, Noah took his camera and headed toward the cliffs. The path along the edge was uneven, barely visible in places, and marked only by the sway of tall grass and the echo of waves crashing below. The wind tugged at his jacket and hair, not violent, but persistent, like the coast itself was trying to keep him awake. He didn't take many pictures at first. His hands hovered over the shutter, his eye pressed against the viewfinder, but nothing clicked. The colors were muted. The landscape seemed unbothered by being documented. It didn't pose or arrange itself for beauty. It just was. But as the hours passed, something shifted. He found himself drawn to the textures. The splintered wood of a fence long since overtaken by sea air, the way the light caught in tide pools between dark rocks, the curve of the cliffs like a sleeping beast at the edge of the world. It wasn't about capturing anything grand. It was about noticing again. He returned in the early afternoon with shoes wet from sea spray and sand caked along the edges of his jeans. When he opened the door, the warmth inside greeted him like a familiar presence. Sebastian wasn't in the main room, but there was a pot of tea left on the table, still steaming, with a second mug already placed beside it. That small gesture settled deep into Noah's chest in a way he didn't fully understand. Later that evening, as the sky began to darken and the fire cracked again in its hearth, they found themselves in the same room without planning it. Sebastian sat on a low chair with a book, though he didn't seem to be reading. Noah sat across from him, sorting through photos on his camera screen, occasionally glancing up when the light flickered. A silence hung between them, but it wasn't hollow. It carried weight, like shared space often does between people who have learned to be alone. Sebastian looked up at one point, catching Noah mid-glance. He didn't smile, not exactly, but there was something softer in his expression. A recognition, perhaps. Noah spoke then, not to break the quiet, but to offer something back. "This place makes it hard to hide from yourself," he said, voice low. Sebastian tilted his head slightly, as though considering the thought. "Most people don't stay long," he replied, his voice like gravel warmed in the sun. Noah didn't answer. He didn't know yet if he would stay long. But in that moment, he felt the pull, not just of the place, but of the person across from him. Not desire. Not yet. Just presence. Understanding. An invisible thread that might become something more if given time. Outside, the wind carried the sound of waves toward the windows, soft and rhythmic. The fire danced between them. No one moved to end the night. They just remained, two men, two stories, quietly overlapping in a house above the sea. And somewhere deep inside Noah, that stillness began to feel like home. The wind picked up on the third day. Noah woke to the sound of it pushing against the windows, not violent yet, but with the promise of change. The sky had turned a heavy shade of gray, with low clouds rolling across the horizon like waves in the sky. The ocean below mirrored the mood, choppy, restless, white crests forming like foam on a simmering thought. He stayed in his room longer than usual, watching the weather shift from the chair near the window. His camera sat unused on the desk beside him. Something about the light was wrong for shooting, too flat and cold. But he didn't mind. The storm didn't need to be documented. It needed to be felt. Downstairs, Sebastian had already moved the outdoor chairs inside and was stacking firewood near the hearth. Noah helped without being asked. Their rhythm had become familiar, unspoken. A nod, a glance, a shared weight passed between hands. They spent much of the morning preparing the house, not for any real danger, but out of habit. Sebastian explained briefly that storms came quickly here, and it was better to be ready. Noah listened, not just to the words, but to the tone beneath them, steady, calm, seasoned. By afternoon, the rain began. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes loud enough to drown out their thoughts. The windows rattled softly in their frames. The wind howled past the eaves and whistled through the gaps in the siding. The fireplace glowed steadily, casting flickering shadows across the room. They shared the space like they had always done, Sebastian with his book in quiet presence, Noah alternating between his sketchpad and blank stares at the fire. Hours passed without urgency. There was nowhere to be, nothing pulling at them. Sometime near dusk, the lights flickered once, then went out. It wasn't unexpected. Sebastian stood, moved toward a nearby drawer, and retrieved a pair of lanterns. He placed one on the table beside Noah and lit it, the soft flame illuminating both of their faces in golden tones. The atmosphere shifted, not darker, but deeper. The quiet grew denser, like the house had exhaled again. They made dinner by lantern light, simple soup reheated on the gas stove, thick bread warmed beside the flame. They didn't speak much. Words would have been too sharp in that kind of softness. After they ate, they remained in the main room, both seated on the floor near the fire, their backs against opposite walls. The storm whispered around them, sometimes pounding, sometimes retreating. Time blurred. It was Noah who broke the stillness first. He didn't speak, but he pulled a single photograph from his camera bag, one he had printed months ago, but hadn't shown to anyone. It was an image of a cracked desert road, leading into the unknown, taken on a solo trip through Arizona. He handed it to Sebastian without introduction, without comment. Sebastian held it in his hands, eyes moving slowly across the image. He didn't ask questions. He didn't praise or critique. He simply absorbed it. Then, after a pause, he reached toward the nearby bookshelf and pulled something free, a slim, battered sketchbook with a worn leather cover. He flipped it open and turned a few pages before placing it in front of Noah. Inside were drawings, coastal scenes, abstract shapes, faces, some detailed, others barely more than lines. The strokes were raw, honest, not meant for display, meant for survival. Noah lingered on one sketch in particular, an outline of the very porch he'd stood on his first night, the wind catching the curtains through an open window. The perspective was exact, yet emotionally charged. He looked up at Sebastian, and for the first time, their eyes didn't just meet, they stayed. Something passed between them in that moment. Not a declaration, not even a realization, just a shift, a quiet acknowledgement of shared solitude, a recognition that what had begun as stillness was becoming something warmer. The lantern flickered between them, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Neither man moved to speak, because sometimes silence says everything. That night, the storm grew heavier. The wind pressed against the house in long, mournful gusts, as if trying to uproot it from the cliff's edge. Rain lashed the windows in sharp rhythms, and the sky flashed with occasional bursts of pale lightning, the thunder low and distant but steady. Inside, the house remained a small pocket of warmth and golden flickering light. The generator hadn't kicked in. They didn't bother trying to fix it. Sebastian brought out more candles, arranging them in small clusters around the living room. Their flames danced quietly in glass jars and atop ceramic holders, casting gentle halos across the shelves and floor. The power outage transformed the space into something almost sacred, like a forgotten chapel where only memory and breath lingered. Noah sat on the couch with a blanket pulled around his shoulders. He hadn't touched his camera since the afternoon. The house had become more of a subject than the world outside ever could, a place where emotions echoed in wood and firelight. Sebastian moved through the room like a ghost in soft flannel, barefoot, hands full of warmth. He set down 2 mugs of tea, then seated himself on the rug near the hearth. The storm outside didn't rattle him. It was clear this was something he'd weathered many times before. For a while, they sat in the gentle hum of the rain. Then, Slowly, like a tide returning to shore, conversation came. It wasn't prompted by question. It arrived from the stillness, as if the storm had peeled something back inside them both. Sebastian began to speak, not about the house, not about the weather, but about himself. He spoke of years spent moving from city to city, of jobs taken out of necessity, and places that never felt like home. He mentioned a man once, in passing, someone who had mattered but didn't stay. His voice didn't crack, but the pauses between his words held a soft ache. There were no dramatic turns, just quiet truths. Noah listened with his hands wrapped around the warm mug, his breath catching in the spaces where Sebastian hesitated. It wasn't just the story, it was the fact that he was telling it, offering it, trusting him with the weight of it. When Sebastian finished, there was no need to respond with sympathy or reassurance. The sharing was enough. Noah set his mug down. He leaned forward, hands clasped loosely, and spoke, not of photography, not of his travels, but of the hollowing, the slow erosion of purpose. How he had begun to feel like a ghost in his own life, drifting through cities and sunsets, capturing beauty without being moved by it. How he had come here not for the view, but because he hoped the silence might confront him. Sebastian didn't interrupt. He just nodded once, and the gesture said, "I understand. I've been there." Outside, the thunder grew louder. A window creaked in the kitchen. One of the candles near the shelf sputtered and went out. And yet, between them, everything felt more stable than ever. Noah reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small, a smooth, flat stone he had picked up on the beach the previous day. He passed it to Sebastian without a word. It was the smallest act of connection, but it echoed with meaning. Sebastian turned it over in his hand, fingers brushing over the salt-worn surface. Then, gently, he placed it on the mantel above the fire, beside an old clock that hadn't worked in years. Noah smiled softly. The room seemed to breathe around them, like the house itself had absorbed their stories and welcomed them both without judgment. There was no rush, no implied promise, just the comfort of being seen, of being still, of being real. When the fire began to dim, Sebastian brought out an extra blanket and laid it across the couch where Noah sat. Their fingers brushed just barely as he did. Noah didn't flinch. Sebastian didn't pull away. No words followed. None were needed. The storm continued to rage beyond the windows, but inside the house on the cliff, something had calmed. Not silence, exactly, but peace. The storm ended sometime before dawn. Noah woke to the distant sound of dripping water, steady, rhythmic like a slow heartbeat. The house, though still wrapped in darkness, felt lighter somehow. The air had changed. No longer charged with tension, it now carried the faint smell of earth and salt and pine washed clean by the rain. He rose slowly, the blanket falling away from his shoulders as he sat up. The fire had long gone cold, but the space retained its warmth. The candles had burned low, leaving wax pools in their bases and shadows streaked along the walls. He pulled on his jacket and moved quietly through the still house. The porch greeted him with a sheen of dampness. The wooden boards were slick beneath his socks, and the railings shimmered with drops that caught the pale morning light. A low mist curled over the bluff, hanging just above the sea, blurring the horizon into a watercolor wash of gray and soft blue. Sebastian was already outside, standing near the edge with a steaming mug in hand. His posture was relaxed, shoulders eased, eyes trained on the ocean. He didn't turn as Noah stepped onto the porch. There was no need. They stood in silence for a while, watching the waves smooth themselves out. The ocean, though never truly still, had quieted. There was a softness in the morning that hadn't been there before, like the world had taken a long breath and decided not to speak just yet. Noah joined him, accepting a second mug from Sebastian without words. The tea was warm, floral, and slightly bitter. It grounded him. He glanced at the older man. The wind played gently with the edge of Sebastian's sweater, and the faintest smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. He looked years younger in that moment, not because of his face, but because of his peace. Something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a declaration or a decision. It was simply a knowing. Later, After the sun had climbed higher and the mist had begun to lift, they returned indoors and moved through the small routines of the morning. They cleaned the fireplace together, wiped down the windows, opened the doors to let the air circulate through the house. No fiddy, no deadlines. Noah packed slowly. His hands lingered on the camera, the sketch pad, the charger cords coiled neatly in their pouch. He wasn't sure if he was preparing to leave or simply resetting. The idea of departure felt less urgent now, less final. He returned to the window, where he had stood his first night, and looked out again. The same view, the same cliff. But everything had changed, and so had he. Downstairs, he placed a new photograph on the mantel. It was one he had taken the day before the storm, a quiet image of the house viewed through tall grass, with clouds gathering in the distance. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. It felt alive. Sebastian saw it, but said nothing. He only gave a brief nod and tapped the wooden frame once before returning to whatever small task he had taken up. By midday, the sun had broken through fully. The wind still stirred the trees, but gently now, like a hand brushing hair from forehead. Noah stood on the steps of the porch, bag slung over his shoulder, keys in his hand. Sebastian leaned in the doorway. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No promises were spoken. No timelines were offered, but there was something in the way their eyes met, a thread not severed, only stretched across distance. Finally, Noah smiled, not the forced, polite one he had worn in cities, in airports, in front of clients. This one was softer, real, and Sebastian returned it, just enough to say, "I see you, and I'll still be here." Noah turned, walked to the car, and opened the door. But before stepping in, he paused and looked back at the house, the place that had offered him something no city ever had. Not an escape, but clarity. He would return. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for months, but he knew now there was a place where he could be still, and someone who understood that stillness. The engine turned quietly. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, and the house on the cliff faded in the mirror, still standing, still silent, still waiting.